the ISI used criminal gangs of Bombay to carry out simply because they had the networks. They had the networks. They were moving gold and silver and narcotics and electronics, and those networks were used by the ISI to infiltrate explosives and weapons in 1993. So gangs have always been used by intelligence agencies. And even in Karachi, if you look at it, all these gangs that you saw in the movie, whether it's the Baloch gangs, the MQM, and all of these guys are all pawns of the Pak deep state. The MQM actually was propped up by Zia. And Musharraf also kind of used them. The political class needs these gangs for political reasons, exactly the way you need Bahubalis to win elections. It is not very often that a movie, a Bollywood film actually makes you reach for a book. You have to select a person who's temperamentally correct, who has the ability not to crack under pressure, who can live in isolated settings, basically a loner, but a loner who can blend into, society. And there is, of course, another spy, whom the Russians, again, like you mentioned, possibly one of the greatest spies of all time, who was planted by was it the KGB or the agency before the KGB, his name was Richard Sorge, and he was planted into Germany.
Welcome to Inner Defense and what promises to be, I think, a very unusual episode. If you've looked at the headline on the podcast app on which you're listening to us on, or maybe YouTube, if that's where you're watching us, you must be wondering, what are we doing talking about a movie, Dhurandhar, that is. I thought we would get lots to talk about from the movie because the movie was pitched as a spy film, espionage thriller. That's what I thought. That's what I had in mind as I walked into the theater this weekend to watch the film. And I messaged Sandeep that, hey, I'm just gonna go for this film. Have you seen it yet? And he said, no, I'll probably catch it in a day or two. I said, I'll make some mental notes. We may have something to talk about. Maybe talk about the spy universe, whether it shows spies in a proper light or not, shows how they work actually or not. And that's what happened. And he came out and we were both wondering, yaar, isme spy kam gangster zyada tha na yaar? It's like Kamlesh Singh, Tau of the famous Teen Tal. He wrote a review and I read that review just after I came out of the theater late night, where he basically said this is Karachi's Satya.
Oh, okay, right. So my take was it's gangs of Wasseypur in Karachi.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's actually just a gangster drama couched in the premise of a deep embed spy sent by Indian agencies, presumably a sleeper spy, presumably raw. But I think there's still some strands we can talk about, Sandeep, on this podcast, and still stay true to our name of Inner Defense by talking about something of a deep embed, a sleeper spy, talking about Raw's actual operations in Pakistan. Very interesting, by the way. Which have seen their ups and downs, very interestingly coinciding with certain prime ministers, is what a former agency chief writes in a book that the two of us have read. But it also gives us a chance to talk about the entire controversy surrounding Dhurandhar. And I think it's an interesting one to talk about before we get into the spy business. Because one, it dominated headlines throughout for the last, it still is, by the way, for the last couple of days, couple of weeks. There's a very show group that thinks that this is a propaganda film. There's another one that thinks that this group has not watched the movie. I lean in favor of people who think that people are commenting on this without even watching the movie. Because, and I'm going to spoil it for you, our listeners and viewers, that famous Akshay Khanna entry scene, by the way, would be surprising to know is not even an entry scene. People think it's an entry scene, but no, it's not. So, I mean, that tells you that people who are talking about this movie without even having watched it, that's okay. Free country. But still, like I said, it's a gangster movie couched in the premise of a spy drama. The only thing I felt wrong, Sandeep, and I think you can tell us what you felt of the controversy and the film itself is the points of the plot, the certain dialogues which could be construed as propaganda validly, they, for me, were not even relevant to the larger plot. So I felt that even if those dialogues, those moments in the film, which were very, very few, by the way. For a 3.5 hour movie, were very, very few such moments. If you took them out entirely, they would not impact the story, the plot, the movie's impact at all. So it was, I think, maybe needless controversy, maybe engineered controversy, I don't know. But it got me to watch the movie.
Right. Absolutely. No. And I think it's a fine movie, Dave. And, I think I was pleasantly surprised when I walked into the theater. Here is a movie that's set in the gangs of a neighboring country.
Yeah.
And yet he's made it very relevant. It's, of course, fictional. A lot of it is, the characters are composites. Yeah. There are characters that, these present, characters who are around and were part of the national security establishment, like Mr. Doval, and there are a few others like Jaswant Singh.
Yes.
So it's actually couched in a bit of a, historical narrative. But for the large part of it, the movie is fiction. But the gangs, the gangs part is actually, there is a spyverse kind of a reference to this, because let's not forget, the ISI used Dawood Ibrahim to carry out the 1993 bomb blasts, right? So that is the first time that the ISI used criminal gangs of Bombay to carry out, simply because they had the networks. They had the networks. They were moving gold and silver and narcotics and electronics, and those networks were used by the ISI to infiltrate explosives and weapons in 1993. And there is reason to believe that we may have done the same as well. There are credible sources which say that the Chota Shakil gang, the Chota Rajan gang, for instance, was being used against Dawood as a, from that famous Sholay line, Sirf Loha Lohi Ko Karta hai, that kind of thing. So gangs have always been used by intelligence agencies. And even in Karachi, if you look at it, all these gangs that you saw in the movie, whether it's the Baloch gangs, the MQM, and all of these guys are all pawns of the Pak deep state. The MQM actually was propped up by Zia. And Musharraf also kind of used them. So, Karachi is a hotbed of ethnic violence. It's a tinderbox where there are multiple groups representing multiple ethnicities. The Baloch and the MQM are the most prominent of the two, Mohajirs, Baloch and the Mohajirs. Then, of course, you have the Pathans. Then you have the Sindhis as well, but they're not as dominant. And these guys are fighting. The political class needs these gangs for political reasons, exactly the way you need Bahubalis to win elections. At least that used to be the case many years back. And you have the Pakistan military jumping in to use the gangs for their own ends, carrying out attacks against India or smuggling weapons, smuggling narcotics, because you smuggle narcotics in, you have a unending source of funding for your covert wars, covert operations. And that is taught to them possibly by the CIA, which used the same in South America.
Masters of that.
Masters, exactly. In the 50s and the 60s and the 70s in South America. They were the ones who helped a lot of people, set up the drug business to fund covert wars. And the ISI, let's not forget, after 1979 was a very different ISI from what it was before 79. So you see in Dhurandhar a lot of elements of that. And I think it's a bold film for an Indian filmmaker to go out and make a movie like this, which actually set me thinking that where have I read this? And then I reached for Lauren Dare's book, and I remembered reading all this about 10 years back. So it is not very often that a movie, a Bollywood film, actually makes you reach for a book.
Yeah, right. Right. Sandeep, I'm going to talk about, I think we'll majorly talk about on this episode about the origins and how raw operations in Pakistan have evolved over the years. Obviously, we will not have specifics of exact operations, but from what we know from open source literature. But before we do that, I want to talk about the concept that was portrayed in this film of embedding a spy so deep into an enemy country, society, that he or she sort of has to blend in and then sort of rise up the ranks of the society to sort of take control and take charge. It's happened in real life before. The most famous example of which is what I would say is the Cambridge Fight, when Soviet Russia embedded 5, if I'm not wrong, spies who they recruited in college years. And they rose up the ranks of British spy agencies only to be then outed as Russian agents. There's also one example that comes up on the internet of an Indian such spy called Ravindra Kaushik. No official recognition of it, no official documentation. So not really sure if it's worth talking about. But I want to talk about the concept in channels.
Right. You missed one, Dave.
Which one?
Eli Cohen.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. That is
in Syria. The guy,
yes.
a Mossad deep cover, sleeper agent who rose to become the deputy minister of defense in the Syrian government until he was exposed.
Yeah, and then he was hanged out on a street.
Yes, and his body was left over there as a. But that's one of the most outstanding examples I remember post the Second World War.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very interesting Netflix show on that, The Spy. It's called. It's a
Sacha Baron Cohen.
It's a fantastic show for people who want to get that story. So tell us about this concept, Sandeep, and what does it really take for somebody, for an agency to convince somebody, whether someone on their rolls or someone in the show, in this case, this is an outlaw. It's something that we learn towards the end of the film. An outlaw who they then sort of, train and set across.
And recruit.
So what does it take for somebody to be trained for something like that, based on whatever you've read and whatever you've talked about, what you've talked about?
Well, I have met one of them, probably one of the greatest sleepers of all time, who went by the name for the longest time, for almost 2 decades. He went by the name of Donald Hetfield. But it turns out that Donald Hetfield was a child who died, was an infant who died at 6 months or 7 months of age in Canada. And Donald Hetfield assumed that identity, came across to the United States and went to Harvard. He met his wife, who also assumed identity, and turns out that he was uncovered. He was betrayed by one of his own in 2010, about 15 years back. And it turns out that Donald Hetfield was actually Colonel Andrei Bezrukov of the KGB. And he had been living deep cover in the United States with this cover identity of Donald Hetfield. And he was going around in American society. He had cultivated his friends and contacts. And they were living, and they're called the illegals. So they actually have an illegals program in Russia. The KGB had it, and it's now kind of moved on to the FSB as well. So I met him a couple of times. And of course, the first question I asked him is exactly what you asked me. How did you do this? I mean, for 20 years, how does somebody just manage to, live deep cover, undercover, not even respond to your original name, and yet, be the KGB agent that you originally are? And his response was, well, I was an officer of the KGB of the state, and I was on a mission. So there are some missions that will last a few hours. There are some that will last for days. In my case, my mission was for several years and decades. So they had many such illegals that were planted in the United States and in other countries in the West and all that, and they continue to do that. So it is a characteristic of intelligence agencies that play the long game, right? The illegals program, for instance, because if one single chief of a spy agency starts looking at operations that will deliver results in his tenure, you will never have a program like a illegals program or a deep cover program, because for that to fructify, it will take decades. The person that you have to select a person who's temperamentally correct, who has the ability not to crack under pressure, who can live in isolated settings, basically a loner, but a loner who can blend into society. They are all psychologically profiled, obviously, before they caught. The last thing you want to know, want to happen is for him to squeal and reveal everything. And he kind of, they would find all these illegals, and they would train them, they would infiltrate them, give them covers. The Russians, of course, are the past masters at doing that. The Americans haven't done that as successfully. The Israelis have done that. They've infiltrated Iran, for instance. They've infiltrated all their, countries of interest around their region. Multiple things. They have spies in Egypt, there's spies in Jordan, there's spies, of course, in Iran. So these are agencies, spy agencies for whom literally it is like a national, national security matters enormously to them. And that's why their intelligence agencies have the kind of primacy to choose these kind of candidates and infiltrate them. We've done that in the past sporadically. You mentioned the name of Ravindra Kaushik. He was one. There were many others who've kind of been sent across the border. They were trained to, and you would typically pick up people from who were closer to the border because the language that they spoke was very similar to where they would be, and they would be infiltrated into the across the border, and they would live normal civilian lives and gather intelligence and become conduits and perform reconnaissance tasks or spying missions and all of that. So it's a very highly skilled mission, and people who are picked like this are exceptionally talented, very high IQ people, like Colonel Bezrukov, for instance. The brightest of the bright would go in for these kind of operations. And because these are long-term operations, they last decades, 10, 20 years. And there is, of course, another spy whom the Russians, again, like you mentioned, possibly one of the greatest spies of all time, who was planted by was it the KGB or the agency before the KGB, which his name was Richard Sorge, and he was planted into Germany. And Sorge was then a German journalist in Tokyo who had infiltrated the high circles of Japanese imperial staff. He had a lot of friends, and he was picking up intel. And he gave Stalin two great breakthroughs. The first one is he almost gave him the exact date of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. It was disregarded. All these guys are drunk. It's useless fellow. And the second intel, and then when the invasion happened, then they realized, oh my God, Sorge was right. The second big intelligence thing that he gave from his sources working as a journalist in Tokyo was that the Japanese would not join the war against the Soviet Union as the Germans wanted them to, which meant that Stalin was caught between two allies, one Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And he had to park his forces here facing the Japanese because he feared that they would be a landward invasion to Manchuria. And immediately he got this intel, it allowed him to rush 10 divisions of his troops away from the Siberian border to the defense of Moscow. So that kind of saved Moscow, and that is one of the biggest breakthroughs of the war. So the Russians are past masters at it, but here we are, Dhurandhar. It's a good story. It's entertaining, and it's very well made. Production quality is excellent. A lot of cribs. I mean, there are stuff that they've got right, like the characters. There is stuff that they could have done better. I mean, I didn't smell the sea. I mean, that was my biggest complaint about Dhurandhar. Karachi is a port city. It's a port town. I don't smell the sea in the film. I don't see a beach. I don't see a seafront. I don't see a merchant ship. I don't see a boat. Nothing. Because the movie has obviously the set has been recreated elsewhere. Thousands of miles inland.
I didn't even in the dialogues and the language, I didn't feel the local element as much as I would want it to.
Right. But you have to give it, Dave. The fact is that I think this is one of the very few Bollywood blockbusters where they have set it, like I said, in a country, another country, an espionage film with the substrate of the gangsters whom the agencies, and this I'm told you will see in the second and third, where you will actually see the masterminds who are actually moving these guys. You will see the Pakistan army coming out there. You saw a bit of that in the first part. Right? You saw Major Iqbal, who's actually a composite for Ilyas Kashmiri and others, but you will actually see the real face of the Pak army in the second part. But the other thing about this is that it is the first Bollywood blockbuster, I think, in recent years where all the characters, the character roles overpower the hero Ranveer. No one's talking about Ranveer. My mother-in-law, when I told her that we're going to watch Dhurandhar, and she's the least interested in Hindi cinema, so we said, "Oh, the Akshay Khanna film." So there you go. So Akshay Khanna, your Sanjay Dutt, Rakesh Bedi. I mean, my God, what a gem! Playing this Nabil Gabol. I mean, that's the real character that he's based on. So it's a fantastic pastiche of all of these great characters who are all real life people. There are a couple of, I mean, Ranveer's character is fictional. It's based on past missions undertaken by Indian spies. But it isn't exactly the way, I mean, a lot of it is fictionalized. But the setting, the characters, the narratives are all pretty authentic.
Yeah, right. So, you talked about when you have the as prospect of launching or embedding a spy deep into someone's society, it's a long-term operation.
Yeah.
That is, it's like foreign policy.
Yeah.
Right? It takes generations.
It's a long game.
Yeah, it takes prime ministers, secretaries, lots of several different iteration generations for that to happen. So for that, you need to have a long-term view of how you want to operate clandestinely in a particular country. Just like you need to have a long-term view of a country, how you want to deal with them diplomatically.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your covert services, how do you want them to function in that particular country is also something you need to have a long-term view on, which I think is something very interesting to talk about because I've read B. Raman's book. I forgot the name. It's called
Cowboys of Raw.
The Cowboys of Raw. Yes, The Cowboys of Raw, where he basically gives us a nice overview of how the Raw came into being under the legendary Chief Cow. The initial bunch of officers, the top officers, were called the Cowboys of Raw. How basically Raw sort of branched out from the IB, took a shape of its own, became an agency of its own and its operations in Pakistan. Take us to the origins, Sandeep. You shared an excerpt of the book with me yesterday before we came in for this recording, and it was during the period of Rajiv Gandhi as prime ministers. There's something very interesting, Sandeep, in the pages that you shared, is that the sort of idea he seemed to have of what he would want an intelligence agency to do in a country like Pakistan was very similar to the idea I think we now have of what an agency needs to do in a country like Pakistan.
Absolutely.
So take us to that period of Raw and its connection.
Absolutely. So so Raw, as you said, was set up in 1968. It was born out of the failure of intelligence in the 1962 war with China, where they did not have a dedicated intelligence for external intelligence agency. You had the external division of the Intelligence Bureau.
Yes.
That was doing all the intel gathering and assessment and stuff. And the government of the day realized that, look, we need a dedicated agency, exactly like the CIA, to look at external intelligence. And in a couple of years, RNW was set up. They carved out the IB's external division, which was headed by people like R.N. Kao and MML Hujan, legends like that. And that was hived off into a separate external agency. And it almost immediately began operations because East Pakistan was identified as a target country. And a lot of covert activities started beginning. They started reaching out to the political class in East Pakistan. And because East Pakistan was seen as a launch pad for a whole lot of terror groups into India's northeast. Manipuris and Mizos and Nagas, they were all being trained in this Chittagong guild practice of East Pakistan. ISI was very active in Pakistan, East Pakistan, pre-1971, and it was identified as a threat by R.N. Kao. And therefore, the operations to separate East Pakistan from the West began right earnest as soon as RNW was created. And there are very few examples in world history of an organization being created, and within 3 or 4 years, it achieves a massive success like the creation of Bangladesh. I mean, you can debate whether the Bangladesh that we see today, is it the Bangladesh that we wanted to create? Well, but there has always been a contradiction in Bangladesh. You have the Awami League, which is fairly secular, and you have a very rabid Jamaat side, which is, you're seeing the ugly side of that today. But R.N. Kao and his cowboys set about the task. They created Bangladesh, and they went on to do other things, great things like the merger of Sikkim with India. They trained many other foreign agencies. They were a covert arm of India's foreign policy, and it's remarkable for a country of India's limited resources back then to achieve the kind of things that they did. They got some things right, like Bangladesh. and they got something's wrong, like Sri Lanka, for instance. That backfired.
Yeah.
You try to do this, replicate the Bangladesh model in Sri Lanka with the LTT, but of course you didn't want to bifurcate Sri Lanka, right? You wanted some kind of limited autonomy for Tamils over there, but then the rest is history. The Indo-Sri Lankan Accord collapsed, and there was fighting with the IPKF that went there to enforce the peace. But RNW has been this organization that, as you mentioned at the beginning, it is always directly under the Prime Minister. Right?
Yeah.
It is not subject to any scrutiny, no act of parliament. It is jealously guarded, zealously guarded, I would say, by the Prime Minister. It's almost like an attached office of the Prime Minister's office, the Cabinet Secretariat, which is what the other name for it is. It's CABSEC. And they've done some phenomenal operations, because of that kind of anonymity that they have, the fact that they don't have oversight. It's been under a lot of criticism.
Yes.
That you need parliamentary oversight. A lot of MPs have argued that they have a point. At some point, we do need that kind of oversight over their functions and all that. But it has been, agencies like RNW have taken on the personalities of the prime ministers. Indira Gandhi, if it had not been for her, I'm not sure if Bangladesh would have turned out the way it had. You had prime ministers like Morarji Desai, who's a Gandhian, and he said, why are we doing espionage against Pakistan? And he shut down some of the covert capabilities that we had developed through the 70s inside West Pakistan. They had actually infiltrated the Pakistani nuclear weapons program. They knew exactly what was going on inside there. So then you had, when Mrs. Gandhi came back in 1980, that's the reference, that's the part that we referred to. She restarted the covert capabilities against Pakistan, which is basically planting, having sleeper cells, infiltration, cultivating agents, moving them across, creating a network within another country. And that there's a famous case of I.K. Gujral shutting down in the interest of peace and good relations with Pakistan. So you have this woolly-headed thing of prime ministers saying, "Oh no, we need peace with Pakistan." Intelligence, business is a dirty business and it's evil and
immoral.
Yeah, immoral. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah,
By its very nature.
it is an extension of statecraft. You have to just see Albania, who tells you this thousands of years back, and nothing has really changed in the basic nature of statecraft. Whether it is administration or running of spies, counterintelligence, all these have been there for thousands of years. It's just the clothes probably that have changed and the technology that is made available. But to answer your question, Rajiv Gandhi, I've asked this. I've heard this from raw chiefs themselves, former chiefs, who actually told me, and this is again, I must clarify, this pre-2014, because the history of what happens after 2014 has not been written yet. It will be at some point, and we might see a very different, analysis possibly about how spy operations were conducted post 2014. We don't know yet. But I was told that, the two prime ministers who understood the functioning of RNW and took a very deep and personal interest in the organization. One was Indira Gandhi, of course, and the second is Rajiv Gandhi. And I was told by one spy chief that he even flew mission for us. I take that to mean that he actually flew ARC aircraft. He didn't say war, but I know that Rajiv was a pilot.
Yeah.
And it's possible that he would have flown an ARC aircraft. So Aviation Research Center, which is the RNW's aviation wing. They have a large number of very diverse aircraft and helicopters. So it's possible that and this is important for prime ministers to understand capabilities of intelligence agencies, because, at the end of the day, I think like prime ministers are like surgeons, right? They have a variety of tools at their disposal. It's not like the military dictatorship of Pakistan that you only have a hammer. And therefore, like I said before, every problem looks like a nail that you have to use the hammer on. But prime ministers have a variety of tools at their disposal. And it could well be that they could choose a path of, instead of direct military action, they could use covert action. Look, this issue is not worth going to war with this particular country.
True.
We could use a covert option, which could give us the same result with much less bloodshed and, sacrificing the lives of so many people and all. So it is important for prime ministers to understand the tools that are there at their command. And this has been true of India as well. And like I mentioned, there's certain prime ministers who've understood it, certain prime ministers which haven't. And the ones that have understood it are the ones that have run the maximum number of covert operations. And, when I put this question about Gujarat shutting down the two operations that RNAW had in Punjab, in Pakistani Punjab and Sindh, there was those two, which B. Raman actually mentioned.
Writes about,
He writes about those two. One was in Sindh and one was in Pakistani Punjab. When I asked the raw chief, a former raw chief, he said, well, he did shut it down. But what about prime ministers that followed him? Every time we go to them and say that, look, we need to restart our covert capabilities, they would say, no, we can't do this. Nobody wanted to take that, bell the cat, so to speak. And with the result that you got completely blindsided by the militancy, the state-sponsored terrorism that Pakistan embarked on from the 90s on. And you were entirely reacting to it. You were reacting because you did not have covert capabilities on the other side to understand what was going on. You had not infiltrated their tanzeems to understand that tanzeems were actually working directly under the Pakistan military. And this was a Pakistan military plan to bleed you by, the death of 1,000 cuts, as this character Dhurandhar says, with Major Iqbal, the chilling guy. So this lack of covert capabilities, lack of, intelligence assets in Pakistan may have been one of the reasons why we did not understand what they were up to, what the Pakistan army was up to, what they were doing with their militancy. And it's a big, I wouldn't say intel failure, but it is assessment failure to understand that the ISI, when the Afghan war started drawing down in 1987, 1988, it became clear that the Soviets were going to withdraw from Afghanistan. The ISI moved the entire jihad factory machinery complex into Jammu and Kashmir.
Yeah.
The Punjab thing was already on. They just moved the entire thing into Jammu and Kashmir. And that is where we bore the brunt of the entire Pakistan-sponsored thing for like 3 decades. It continues now, but at a very, very low level.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been fortunate, or rather, I've had the misfortune of seeing the high water mark of state-sponsored terror of Pakistan. Where Badami Bagh, I'll never forget that. Badami Bagh camp. There was these warehouses drilled with weapons captured from terrorists that the Pakistanis had sent across the border. I remember, we were told that there are enough weapons in here to equip an infantry division. And that was in 5 years of fighting CIOps in Jammu and Kashmir. 15,000 assault rifles in that one location. That is the kind of thing that, and all of this was siphoned off from the Operation Cyclone, which is a CIA operation to arm the Afghan Mujahideen against the Soviet occupiers. And, incidentally, that also is the start point for a lot of the politics of Liari, in case many of you out there want to read more about it. It actually starts in 1979 with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, where Karachi suddenly becomes really important. The drugs are going out from Afghanistan. The heroin is going out. Afghan heroin is exiting through Karachi, and the weapons are entering through Karachi. And in the middle are all these gangs.
Yeah.
And they're all heavily armed, and they're all carrying weapons around. And there's a Dawood Ibrahim connection as well, because he relocates to Karachi.
Yes.
And there is this, I trying to remember where this was. I read this somewhere where one of the Dawood Ibrahim gangsters said that, these Karachi people are not like the guys in Bombay. They, in Bombay, you scare anyone and they pay up immediately. Here, even the hawkers are armed. They're carrying like weapons and they're carrying assault rifles. So it's like, so it's like the gangs of Bombay trying to relocate in the gangs of Karachi. And the city is really violent. And it is as violent as the movie shows them to be. It's exactly what happened. I mean, there's one character. I want to break it for you. In probably you'll see his end in the second part. Who's the guy who's the the bad guy in the first one. He meets a very gory end in the second part. I wouldn't name.
Yeah, let's not.
Yeah. We won't spoil it in there. But he meets a gory guy. I mean, he's like literally. This is the real guy, right? The real character. He's beheaded. They play football with his head, and they chop his body up. It's really as violent as it gets, and that's actually the way these gangs in Karachi and all that were. Our gangsters in Bombay are actually they're very tame compared to. Thank God for that. Yeah? The worst that they've done is to break into the JJ hospital and fire with AK-47s and all that. And maybe, some shootouts. And usually the public aren't really, there's a couple of targeted shootouts and all. But these guys in Karachi, they took it to a different level. And that's what this movie captures to some extent.
Yeah, right. And a good point there about, how the shutting down of operations, covert operations of RAW in Pakistan sort of has impacted India for several years, because that's, I think, what the core argument that B. Raman also makes in his book is that this is a long game.
Yeah.
You shut it down, building it back also takes equally long. Right? It takes time. And I think an argument can also be made that lack of intelligence, that blindness sort of could be stretched up until the Mumbai attacks, because that's the ability that you lost several years ago. We'll talk more about covert operations, what exactly they might look like in real life, but after a quick break.
The army chief, General Waqar-uz-Zaman, is related to her somewhat.
Right.
And apparently he advised her to leave the country and flee, and she fled to India. So you, in your readings, have said that he did not play fair. Why do you have that impression?
Right. See, Sheikh Waqar-uz-Zaman, the army chief, had been assuring, which is there in the book, and which the Home Minister, during a subsequent interview with us, he also talked about that. The Bangladesh Home Minister in exile in India.
He incidentally has also been sentenced to death in absentia.
In absentia.
Found guilty along with Sheikh Hasina.
Right.
Zaman
Kamal.
Zaman Kamal. Yeah.
So he also, he told us, and that is something that we knew also, that Waqar-uz-Zaman assured Sheikh Hasina that the army is going to take control of the situation, and is going to nothing is going to happen to her or the government. They will disperse the protesters. On the critical night of August 4th, the army was supposed to be out on the streets. He said the police, we don't require the police because the police have killed a number of protesters, and the police are a hated force out there. So let the army come in, let the army be out on the streets, withdraw the police, and the army is going to control that. The moment people see the army, they are going to, quieten down, calm down, and they're going to go back to their homes. At a critical juncture, on the night of August 4th and the early morning of August 5th, the army played a silent bystander, looked the other way as lakhs and lakhs of people, or tens of thousands of people from even the neighboring areas, other parts of the country, they streamed into Dhaka, and they, then they started overrunning, government offices and all that. Ultimately, Gana Bhavan, which is the residence of Sheikh Hasina. So he led Hasina up the garden path, assuring her that the army is in control, nothing is going to happen to her. And at the last moment, he was the one also who kept on telling her, please leave the country, otherwise your life is in danger.
Yeah, and that's how somehow she managed to get into that C-130 Hercules aircraft.
Right.
And once it was airborne, I'm told that's the time they reached out to India saying, give us permission to come into your country.
Welcome back. Sandeep, before the break, we were talking about covert operations.
Yeah.
I think people have this one image of, gun-toting agents in the blind, in alleyways, breaking into houses, climbing rooftops and stuff like that. That, I think, is maybe 1% of what actual spies do. I once spoke to Major Manik Jolly in one of my episodes previously, who's retired from the military intelligence. He's the closest, honestly, in real life. I've talked to somebody who's worked in intelligence for the Indian agencies. And he said that 90% of my work was desk work.
Yeah.
Whatever field work was there involved mostly going out, meeting people, talking to people, getting information out of them.
Yeah.
So, when we say covert operations, people have this very filmy idea of this is what happens. something that's also obviously shown in Dhurandhar. But that's just one. That's one operator, by the way. One operator who's collecting intelligence for you. It all is about gathering that and sitting it on a big desk and sort of sorting it together and bringing everything together. So when we say Sandeep operations, when you say Sandeep that Rajiv Gandhi understood how operations should be run, Indira Gandhi understood that. We don't know right now how the operations have been run in the last decade and a half. We'll know that very soon. When you say that, what do you exactly mean, and what do you picture happening in real life when you talk about that?
Well, prime ministers who understand intelligence agencies, they ask for results from them. Like, you want intel that comes on your table every day. Every prime minister gets it, exactly like the president's daily brief is prepared by the intelligence agencies. The Prime Minister of India used to be briefed almost every day by the Army Double Chief. I'm not sure if that still happens. They had a direct link on all issues that had a bearing on India's external security was briefed by the Raw Chief. But I think now the NSA has taken up a lot of those roles because he is literally the top intel czar. So he's the single point of contact for the political class in this case. But the fact is that, prime ministers, heads of government must expect results from intelligence agencies, which will alert them to the big picture kind of thing that is happening in countries of their interest. In our case, there are, we've traditionally focused only on countries that are around our periphery, which we have unsettled issues, border issues with, which is Pakistan and China primarily. And then you have other states like, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar and all the rest. But there is an argument now that you might need to expand your budgets. You need to hire more people because as you rise in the world, your economy becomes bigger. You will have other countries that are of great interest to you, like for instance, the United States, Russian Federation, of course, traditional friends, allies. But I would argue, like for instance, in the United States, why did we miss the fact that Trump was turning towards Pakistan?
Yes,
right. That is something that we don't know yet. Did our intelligence agencies brief the Prime Minister the fact that the Pakistanis were making repeated visits to the United States? They were hiring lobbyists, and that had a straight bearing on India's national security. Right. There are those small little missions where you have a raw chief or a raw operator who's sitting over there and he sees a Pakistani delegation coming there and buying an enormous number of snow boots and high altitude clothing in the 80s and the early 80s. And they deduce that this can only mean that they're going to launch, operation to get Siachen, right? And that kind of, the government of India launched OPNIC to capture Siachen in 1984. So stuff like this is really important. And it tips you off about your adversaries' capabilities and, tells them what they are up to. Like in this case, this is a more recent example of the United States turning towards Pakistan into Pakistan's favor. The fact that Pakistan had already made deep inroads into Turkey, Azerbaijan, China, creating the so-called axis, making themselves useful. And I want to know, and of course, Saudi, traditional friends, partners, allies. I want to know at what point did General Asim Munir stop wearing his glasses? Right? There is a change in Asim Munir's body language. If you see the time, I think when he was a lieutenant general, he hadn't become the army chief. He was this bespectacled guy. He looked like a very scholarly.
There are photos of him.
There are, of course. Yeah. There are photos of him with when he was DG ISI with Imran Khan. He's wearing glasses, right? Rimless glasses. And all of a sudden, those glasses vanish. And then you see him wearing boots, elevator boots, with like 3-4 inches lifts going to meet Trump. So there were little changes like this in Munir, which would have been picked up by intelligence agencies. Again, I'm not privy to whether that was communicated or no, but these are the kind of things that will alert intelligence to something big that's happening. Now, Kargil, for instance, it's been, that's a huge, big debate where R&W said that they did tip off the armed forces, about the fact that Pakistan was going to try something. There was a certain build-up that they were warning about, and there were many specific pieces of intel and stuff. So this is where you have intelligence, and especially in areas where you have, borders that are not settled, and therefore you have adversaries who will try to, alter the borders or launch attacks, those kind of things. That's where the role of intelligence agencies is really critical. And of course, you have, int agencies. One of the biggest role of int agencies is what the former chief Vikram Sood, one of the most outstanding writers or former intelligence chief writers, who brings. He's got a trilogy of books that I think all of you should read. And one of the second book is called The Ultimate Goal, where this again open source data, where he talks about what is the ultimate goal of intelligence agency. It's of course to gather intelligence, one part of the thing, right? To what is the host nation, target nation up to? There's that. How's the nuclear weapons program going? What range are their missiles? Who's doing this? What aid are they getting from them? But he says, and this is really interesting, the ultimate goal is to build narratives, right? That's the goal of intelligence agencies. That it's not so much about collecting intel, but to build narratives. And when you build a narrative, it's such a powerful thing that you can't fight it, right? But yet it is what people believe. It's not the reality. It's exactly like what we saw in Sindhu, right? You may have destroyed all of Pakistan's air bases. You may have forced their air force to run away to depth bases. The Navy was hiding. They were literally a landlocked state with no Navy protecting anything, right? They were left to the mercy of the gods. But in their mind, they believe they've won a fantastic victory because the narrative is being shaped. Because they supposedly brought down some jets, they won the war. Whereas we've not been able to project the kind of narrative using the fact that what the Prime Minister said on the 12th of May drew the new red lines. It actually collapsed Pakistan's narrative that it had been building up for 3-4 decades, which is that state actors and non-state actors. We are state actors, we have nothing to do with non-state. Terrorism is a universal religion, and this is something that all politicians in Pakistan keep parroting. Terror is a universal problem. We must all work together to fight it. We are also suffering from terrorism. We have not been able to build the narrative which says that the terrorism that Pakistan is suffering from is caused by itself. The terrorism that it is inflicting on its neighbors like Afghanistan and India is state-sponsored terrorism. We are not able to get those distinctions. And this is where intelligence agencies come in. And I think, the biggest example, again, because this is based on something that you said there about the Cambridge fight, the Cambridge Spies, right? In the 16th, late 59-60 is when the Kim Philby scandal is exposed. The counter-intel chief of MI6 is a KGB mole, right? He's uncovered as a KGB mole. And in the 60s, there's chaos in MI6, right? The agency is discredited. You can't have the counterintelligence, the guy whose job is to hunt spies. He's a spy. Right? It is as funny as that. It's hilarious. It's hilariously tragic. The CIA is so deeply suspicious of MI6 that these guys are so thoroughly penetrated. They've, like 4, 5, 6 spies and all at the top level, right? Can we trust these guys with any intel? And then, right. And that character continues for 6 decades. Yes. Hollywood, right? James Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service. There's suddenly a movie called Dr. No that makes its debut in 62.
Yes.
And that elevates MI6's public persona into this ultimate agency, which is punching above its weight, and James Bond is saving the world from terrorists and megalomaniacs, and that continues till date.
Wonder where the idea came from.
Ian Fleming, former MI6 agent, it's all out there. It's the ultimate narrative that was constructed to make people believe that MI6 was invincible. Right? The KGB has not had a great movie about its own things. I would give them Sorge or all of the other great operations that they've run, including Kim Philby. They've been at the receiving end of a lot of bad press, right? So the narratives is the ultimate thing. curriculum, which intelligence agencies do. And this is something that West is really good at, building narratives, where the Soviet Union was defeated in movie after movie after movie through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and finally it just collapsed. The whole thing collapsed, and every from Rocky to Rambo to James Bond, of course.
I never thought of this until you said it, the James Bond thing. But now that you say it, it makes so much sense. And now I think of it, there's another character.
Yeah.
This is on the literature side, written by John Le Carre, George Smiley, who actually is this master spy who uncovers Kim Philby.
Yeah.
In the books, he's not called Kim Philby, but one of the books, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, is actually about MI5 and MI6's internal hunt for these Russian spies. And now that I think of it, even John Le Carre had some spy background.
Of course, they're all spies. They're all spies.
This is
narrative. They're all building narrative.
And note to my producer, this is gonna be a separate segment altogether.
Yeah, it is that.
But that's a very fantastic point, Sandeep, because if you think of it, it makes so much sense. You are basically saying, without saying it out loud, that James Bond and characters like George Smiley are basically creations of intelligences to sort of help the narrative.
All of Hollywood is narrative. It's a narrative, actually. It is like movies like Zero Dark 30, they all advance a certain narrative. They are advancing the United States narrative, saying that this great operation that we embarked on, getting Osama bin Laden. The CIA was actually going out there and helping all of
course.
And which is why I think movies like Dhurandhar, they attack the third pillar of Pakistan's strategy against India, right? So, this is to use this, and this is in a piece that I'm written for India Today on why Dhurandhar is important. I see it as a breakout moment for Bollywood, because it's the first time, I think in recent times, where somebody has called out the complicity of the Pakistan state and the army in fomenting terror against India, right? You've had small attempts in the past, but what I see is that three levels of this. One is, of course, it's all the terrorists within India, the foot soldiers. The second level is when you're looking at the tanzeems in Pakistan, the Lashkar, the Jaish, and all of that. That's the second level. Now, we all know that there's actually a puppeteer, which is the Pakistan military. And this is possibly the first movie that actually hints at, and this is something that we've probably seen in the second part of Dhurandhar, that all these pawns are actually being moved by the Pakistan army. You see one character over. And that is the reason that Dhurandhar is really a breakout movie, to my mind, because it calls out Pakistan's sponsorship of terror. It is not an anti-Pakistani movie or an anti-Muslim movie or an anti-India movie. It calls out Pakistan's sponsorship of terror and using of all of these characters to achieve its goals. And I think that's what makes it such a big thing, because if you see this strategy of Pakistan in the last couple of decades is you had nuclear weapons enabled terrorism, right? Which threatens your political class, which then restrains the military. And then you have your Aman Ki Asha projects, which directly attack civil society in India and say, no, we are just like you and we are the same, Appi Jappi and all of that and all that. So these three pillars are what, incidentally, Clausewitz outlines in On War, center of gravity of a nation. You have the political class, the military, and the common man, the people.
Yeah.
So the first two have been taken care of by NWET, and the third one is your public opinion. What do the people believe?
Yes.
Do people believe that the Pakistan army is actually fomenting terror in India by launching attacks and all that? They say, you ask them who's doing it. Oh, it's Dawood Ibrahim. Oh, it's Lashkar-e-Taiba. Oh, it's Jaish. Nobody's pointed to the real perpetrators, which was the Pakistan army. And you had none other than President Musharraf, General Musharraf, saying that in one of our conclaves when he was on SAT thing, India Today conclave. He tells Aishwarya that don't act in movies that show Pakistan in poor light. So he's not afraid of the Indian military marching on the Pakistan border, Parakram.
Yeah.
He's afraid that, influencers like Aishwarya, Bollywood, the soft power of things, shouldn't paint Pakistan in poor light because it is the ultimate objective, it's the ultimate goal, which is the narrative play. And that is what Dhurandhar has actually done. And that would worry a lot of people on that side of the border, that especially the Pak military. This is something that Munir has no answer for, right? Militarily, he can fight you. I mean, there's no match militarily either. Narratives he can create and fight. How do you fight a Bollywood movie narrative? Your own people are watching the movie. They even had that thing of Bilawal Bhutto walking in and they're playing the Dhurandhar thing as he makes his entry. Yeah, that song by the very rapper.
Yeah, I forgot the name.
Yeah. It's bizarre. So this is something that they're really worried about. And that's why that is actually, to me, it is what Dhurandhar has really done. It's the attacking that narrative that these guys have written, the Pak army, the Pak deep state, to tell you that you have to keep talking to us. We'll keep attacking you, killing your citizens in the, killing them like dogs in Mumbai and Delhi and Bengaluru. And, that's what Musharraf did. That is the big irony of him telling Aishwarya not to act in movies shown in Pakistan and Poland. This is the man who started the war against India into the heartland.
Yeah.
He expanded the war between 2000 and 2008. He's the one who pushed it out into Gujarat, into Mumbai, into Delhi, into Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and all that. And he's killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Indian citizens. And he's worried about the prospect of a Bollywood that shows in Poland. So I think it's interesting that out of these three pillars that Clausewitz says, the government, the military, and the civilians, two pillars have been attacked in Operation Sindoor 7 months ago. And the third pillar has now been attacked by this one called Dhurandhar.
Right. I think we ended there. And a very good point to end the episode on about how one of the core jobs of an intelligence agency is also to look after the narrative and work towards building that.
Yeah, so, but I want to tell you this one thing, because I don't know when we're going to come back to another thing very quickly about how, and this is an India Today story. You should actually link that India Today story to where RNW whistleblower came to me and told me that he had evidence of corruption for the RNW chiefs and senior RNW officials were involved in companies they had. They were directors of companies and therefore were corrupt. So I followed that up and I landed up in 2 flats owned by these directors of these so-called companies that were still there. And it turns out that those flats did exist, those properties did exist, but they were safe housing. So they had floated a company. Of course, it was, and they had these guys, and all agencies do that.
Yeah,
they have companies. They have companies, they do. You can't have RNW walking
in leasing spaces
or leasing spaces or this thing. So that's how it works. So that's how it is. Yeah, that was my first-hand thing with how agencies work. That was a couple of years back. I was 24.
Yeah, no, we'll actually do another episode on intelligence because I don't think we've covered the whole gamut of what this.
I have a sense you're going to be talking about in a few months when the second part of that movie comes out.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So we will definitely have another episode on this topic and we'll cover more. But thanks for this chat, Sandeep. Great chat. And like I said, I love that sort of enlightening moment that you've given me about James Bond and by extension, George Smiley. One of my favorite characters of George Smiley.
Outstanding.
One of my favorite characters.
What a great fictional character.
Yeah. And John Lee, one of my favorite writers as well when it comes to spy novels. But that's that. Thanks, Sandeep. Great chat as always.
As always, Dev.
Yeah. Thanks to all our listeners and viewers. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and don't cross any boundaries for the passport.